Hi, welcome to another video. So, everyone is talking about Claude Mythos right now. Leaked names, rumors, all of that stuff. But what if I told you that you can build your own Mythos setup today, and it does not cost you $100, $200, or some ridiculous enterprise subscription? I am calling this one GLM Mythos. And no, I do not mean that ZAI secretly launched some hidden GLM Mythos checkpoint or something like that. I mean a workflow, a harness, a stack, because honestly, that is where a lot of the real magic is now. The raw model matters, yes, but the difference between a decent coding agent and an insane coding agent is increasingly the system prompt, the workflow layer, the terminal tool, the design constraints, and how you stop context rot before it ruins the whole thing. So in this video, I want to show you how to turn GLM 5.1 into what I would call ultra mode for just $3. And the stack is actually pretty simple. GLM 5.1 is the engine, Kilo CLI is the body, KingMode is the discipline, Frontend Design Skill is the taste, and GSD, or Get Shit Done, is the anti-chaos layer that stops the whole thing from losing the plot halfway through. If you have watched my videos on GLM 5.1, KingMode, GSD, or the Frontend Design Skill, then this is basically the final form of all of those ideas put together. So let's get right into it. First, why GLM 5.1? Because I have already tested it quite a lot, and the biggest thing with GLM 5.1 is that it feels much more agent-focused than chat-focused. If you use it as a casual chatbot, it can be a bit weird. Sometimes it wants to code when coding is not even necessary. Sometimes it overcommits. Sometimes it behaves like it is itching to open a terminal and start building even when you just asked for a simple answer. But when you put it inside an actual agentic coding workflow, then the whole story changes. It follows instructions better than GLM5, it debugs better, it plans better, and it is much better at those long-running tasks where the model has to inspect files, make changes, run checks, notice errors, and then keep going until the thing actually works. That is why I think GLM 5.1 is the right base for this. It already has the raw capability. What it needs is better harnessing. So that is exactly what GLM Mythos is. Now, step one is the cheap part, which is the whole reason this workflow is even exciting. You get the GLM Coding Plan that starts around $3. So that is the core value proposition here. You're not trying to brute force your way to premium results by buying the most expensive subscription on earth. You are taking a cheap but very strong model and then wrapping it with better instructions and better workflow design. So that is a much more interesting game to me. So once you have the plan, open Kilo CLI. I use Kilo CLI a lot these days because it is fast, it is terminal first, it supports a ton of models, and it is just a really nice shell for agentic work. The setup is also dead simple. Open Kilo CLI and run/connect. Choose the ZAI Coding Plan option, paste your API key, and let it configure the provider. Then run/models and select GLM 5.1. So that is basically the raw setup done. At this point, you already have a very good cheap coding agent. But raw GLM 5.1 is not GLM Mythos yet, not even close. Now comes the first real upgrade, and that is KingMode. If you are new here, KingMode is my system prompt that basically forces models to stop being lazy. It does not magically make a model smarter. It makes the model more disciplined.
That distinction is really important. GLM 5.1 is already smart. The issue is that sometimes it still overthinks simple tasks, gives too much fluff, or rushes into implementation without front-loading enough structure on medium or hard jobs. KingMode fixes that by adding discipline. The zero fluff rule cuts out the annoying filler, and the Ultrathink trigger tells the model to stop, assess the complexity, think through the architecture, and then execute with intent instead of just vibing its way through the repo. So, in Kilo CLI, I would load KingMode into the system instructions or whatever rule file setup you're using there. Once that is in place, GLM 5.1 immediately gets more focused. It talks less and delivers more. And for complex prompts, you start the request with Ultrathink. That is what activates the deeper behavior. Now, I used to say that for GLM5, KingMode alone was often enough, and for pure backend architecture, I still think that is mostly true. But if we are talking about full GLM Mythos mode, where I want this thing to behave like a premium product builder and not just a senior backend engineer, then I absolutely add the front-end design skill as well. Because one of the biggest problems with AI-generated apps is not that they do not work. It is that they look like AI slop. Same bland layouts, same safe typography, same generic rounded cards, same default blue buttons, same soulless dashboard energy. And that is exactly what the front-end design skill fixes. It gives the model actual taste. It forces hierarchy, stronger typography, better spacing, more intentional composition, and generally stops the UI from looking like it was generated by a committee of average landing pages. So now, with just those two additions, KingMode and the front-end design skill, you already have something pretty crazy. You have GLM 5.1 running inside Kilo CLI with the mindset of a strict architect and the taste of a much better designer. But there is still one big problem: context rot. And this is where GSD comes in. Now, GSD is probably one of the smartest open source workflow layers I have seen recently, because it directly attacks the thing that ruins most AI coding sessions. You start strong, then the context gets bloated, the model starts forgetting earlier decisions, it changes random files, it loses the product shape, and suddenly you're babysitting it more than it is helping you. GSD is built to stop that. What I like about it is that it separates the work into stages: map the code base, discuss the phase, plan the phase, execute the phase, verify the work. That sounds obvious, but most people do not work like this with AI agents. Mostly people just dump one giant prompt into a model and hope it does architecture, implementation, design, testing, and product judgment all in one go. That is exactly how you get a messy result. So with GLM Mythos, I use GSD as the workflow brain. And I want to be clear here, because this matters. I'm not saying the magic is in some one specific / command more than the process itself. The real power is the structure. Even if your day-to-day execution is happening inside Kilo CLI, the GSD workflow is what keeps the project memory clean and the task decomposition sane. That is the part that matters most. So the practical GLM Mythos flow looks like this. First, you connect GLM 5.1 in Kilo CLI with /connect and /models. Then you inject KingMode into your rules. Then you add the front-end design skill for UI tasks. Then you stop doing giant vibe prompts and start using a GSD-style execution loop. Map the codebase first. Surface the gray areas before coding. Plan the work in small vertical slices. Execute in smaller bursts. Then verify actual deliverables instead of just trusting that the code compiling means the feature is good. That is GLM Mythos.
Now, let me make this concrete. Let's say I want to build a full-stack movie tracker app, because that is still one of my favorite benchmark-style tasks. In a normal cheap model workflow, you paste a giant prompt, it writes a bunch of files, maybe the UI is okay, maybe the backend sort of works, and then you spend the next 40 minutes figuring out what it broke. In GLM Mythos mode, I do it differently. I would start with something like this: Ultrathink, follow a GSD-style workflow, first inspect and map this codebase, then identify the missing architecture for a movie tracker with authentication, saved movies, trending view, and user history. Discuss unclear product decisions before implementation. After that, plan phase 1 as a vertical slice, execute it, run checks, and verify the deliverables. That is already a completely different request. I'm not just saying build me a movie tracker, I am telling the model how to work. And that is huge. So what happens? First, because of KingMode, GLM 5.1 does not just start vomiting files. It pauses, it inspects the project, it thinks about the schema, it decides what tables are needed, it thinks about how user history should be modeled. It actually behaves like an architect instead of a syntax machine. Then, because of the GSD workflow layer, it is not trying to solve everything in one giant burst. It scopes phase 1 properly. Maybe phase 1 is authentication, plus the basic trending feed, plus the saved movies schema. Good, that is manageable. Then it executes that slice. And because this is GLM 5.1 inside Kilo CLI, it can actually inspect files, edit them, run commands, run lint, notice what failed, and keep going. That is where the model is strongest. Now here is where the front-end design skill starts doing real work. Instead of giving you the standard black and white dashboard with a boring card grid and default font choices, it starts making actual visual decisions. It thinks about hierarchy. It thinks about typography. It thinks about spacing rhythm. It avoids the generic AI slop look. So, rather than getting a working but embarrassing UI, you get something that actually looks shippable. And then once the slice is done, the GSD mindset kicks in. Again, you verifier, not just, does it compile? But can the user actually sign in? Does the trending page load? Can I save a movie? Does the saved state persist? Do the empty states make sense? That is the difference between generated code and a generated feature. And this is why I think GLM Mythos is genuinely a better framing than just talking about a raw model. Because what people usually call premium model quality is often not just the checkpoint. It is the surrounding workflow. It is the harness. It is the instructions. It is the memory system. It is the decomposition. Plus, if you give GLM 5.1 all of that, then for around $3, the result is honestly kind of absurd. Now, to be fair, there are still some caveats. First, this is not magic. If your requirements are garbage, the output can still be garbage. GSD helps surface ambiguity, but it does not replace product thinking. Second, do not use the full GLM Mythos stack for every tiny task. If you just want to rename one variable or tweak one button color, you do not need Ultrathink, GSD decomposition, and the whole cathedral of prompts.
That would be overkill. This workflow makes sense for medium and large tasks where structure is the bottleneck. Third, I would not burn GLM 5.1 on every tiny thing either. If you have cheaper included GLM models available in the same plan, use those for lower stakes edits and then bring in GLM 5.1 when you want the actual heavy lifting, harder debugging, and more architectural work. That is the budget-conscious way to do it. And fourth, the Frontend Design Skill is amazing for UI, but if you're doing pure back-end work, I would keep it lean and just use KingMode plus the GSD workflow. So you still want to apply some judgment here, but overall the stack is just super strong. Kilo CLI gives GLM 5.1 a good terminal body. KingMode forces focus and cuts fluff. Frontend Design Skill gives it taste. GSD gives it structure and anti-context rot discipline. And GLM 5.1 itself gives you the raw coding power, planning improvements, and long-running agent behavior. Put all of that together, and you basically get a cheap, open workflow that feels way more expensive than it actually is. That is why I call it GLM Mythos. Not because it is some secret leaked model, but because it feels like the mythical version of GLM that people keep wishing existed out of the box. And the funny part is, you do not need to wait for a company to ship that as a product. You can just build the stack yourself right now. So, if you have been watching the Claude Mythos hype and thinking, cool, but what can I actually use today? Then this is my answer. Use GLM 5.1. Run it in Kilo CLI. Inject KingMode. Add the front-end design skill when visuals matter. Use GSD as the workflow layer. And stop treating the raw model like it is the whole product. That is how you get Ultra Mode for $3. Overall, it's pretty cool. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this video, consider donating through the Super Thanks option or becoming a member by clicking the Join button. Also, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye.